Okay. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, so today is our first lecture. We'll talk what is game theory, and we discuss some applications of the game theory, why we need to study it, and we'll discuss types of the games. Let me start from the course team. There are just two of us. I'm going to give lectures and conduct seminars. My name is Dmitry Kislitsyn, Dmitry Viktorovich. And for some groups, the majority of groups, seminars will be conducted by Dmitry Shapov, Dmitry Sergeyevich. Here are our emails, but I would personally prefer you to send me questions via Team. So use direct message in Team if you have some question. It will be faster, I think. Okay, so what is game theory? Game theory is the science of strategic interaction. Maybe it's not a very good definition because now we need to define what is strategic, right? And strategic situation is a situation then the best course of action of each player depends on what other players do. This is a very important idea, and I will spend big parts of today's lecture trying to be sure that all of you understand this idea. So we're talking about interdependence on, first of all, opponents' decisions, and then it's a bit more tricky idea, their expectations about each other's behavior. So expectations are also important. I hope at least some of you will find this course refreshing, because in management, you use this term strategy a lot. And then I was a student, I remember I had a lecture on, I think it was strategic management or something like this. And the professor spent the whole class trying to discuss what is strategy, presenting like 5 different approaches. So what is strategy? And it feels so weak. I mean, it's so difficult to apply this concept if you cannot even define it, right? I'm not saying it's always like this in management, but at least sometimes the word strategic used as a big grand word to hide a lack of meaning. And if some of you watched the film about Tinkoff Bank, maybe you remember this moment then during the interview with the director of new project department in Tinkoff, then he was explaining how it's organized in their bank. He was talking about other organizations. So you know how other organizations do it. Why are you doing this? This is nonsense, because it's a strategic decision. Oh, strategic? Wow, okay, then let's do it. In this course, we use the word strategic in a very particular sense. Well, game theory is an applied math, so all words have very precise meaning. And strategic situation means your payoff, what you got after your decision, depends on other people's actions, and their payoff depends on your action. So it's interrelation. Actually, in this lecture, we will not define strategy. This idea of strategy in game theory will become much more evident when we'll discuss dynamic games later in the course. So now we need to learn to distinguish between two things, game and decision. So game, I repeat one more time, it's a situation when players affect each other and players are aware that they affect each other. Decision, let's use this term for this case. Decision is when people do not affect each other, or they are not aware that they affect each other. So let's discuss 3 different situations. I hope they are close to you because you are students, and it's kind of standard situation. So the first is then students' grades depend only on grades they get for individual exercises or tests. So idea here is that if you have a high grade, it's good for you, and it does not really influence other students. I hope it's clear. So the second situation is students' grade depends on their relative rank. So what does it mean? If you have a high grade, it's a good for you, but simultaneously it's a bad for other students because you have high grades, higher rank than they, and they will receive lower grades, lower final grades. Is it clear, this idea?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the last situation is students' grades depend on their relative rank, but they are not aware of it. It's impossible in high school of economics. It's forbidden directly, but let's say it's possible. So what do you think about these 3 situations? So can you find game here? Can you find the game here?
The evident game is B, but speaking about C, it is not clear because players should be aware of that they affect each other. But in this situation, we don't know that we affect each other. That's why I think B is.
Right. What would you expect? How would players behave in these situations? How would students behave in these situations? For example, in B.
Maybe they'll try to do their best to achieve a higher rank, and maybe if we speak about coordination of their efforts, maybe they won't share their knowledge with each other, won't help in some cases, but maybe they just, or maybe not. Yeah, it's they just will try to do their hard to be the best.
Well, look, this grading system presented in B, it's a good in terms of creating some competitive strain, right? So if your grades, high grades of you negatively influence other students will probably they will not share their knowledge in B compared to A, at least share less. You don't want to help other students. It's a more competitive. At the same time, it's possible for students, especially if it's small group, to have a collusion, like agreement against the teacher or professor. They can decide, let's just relax. If we all relax, we'll receive the same grades, but we'll work much less. For example, we all know who is the best student in the group and who is the worst. So let's keep the same rank, but work, 2 times less, and we still have the same grades. It's a strategic behavior, right? Talking about C, I would expect students to behave exactly like in A, because if they don't know, they cannot really take into account and change their behavior. One more example of this distinction between game and decision. Let's say after this class, I need to meet one person in the cafe near Petrogradskaya metro station. And my choice is either to take a bus or taxi. If I take a look in the program, I can see that it will take about 15 minutes for me to take the bus. I have to cross the road. I don't like it. About 15 minutes, it's pretty okay. Talking about bus, it will take 6 minutes, much faster. I will not have to cross the road. So what should I do? What would you recommend?
Depends on, like, would you like to be there in advance and spend money, or it's okay with you to like have a long trip but pay less?
So it really depends on my preferences, right? So it's a decision. So what should I do depends on my, as a decision maker, preferences. A preference about many things. Maybe about money. For example, bus is cheaper. Maybe it's about time. Taxi is faster. Maybe it's about convenience. A lot of people prefer taxi, but some people, they just don't like taxi. Like, you have to talk with the people sometimes. And so it's a decision. It's an example of decision. And it's a very similar to economic choice as you studied it in microeconomics. So there are individual preferences and there are costs of the alternatives, right? So there are benefits and costs, and we kind of compare them and make our decision. So if time is extremely important for me, if I cannot be late and I don't have enough time, I'll have to take a taxi, right? So it depends on just my preferences and costs. What about this situation? So which subway car to take? What do you think? Is it a decision or game? Then I say which subway car to take. I mean, far one, this in the middle, close to me, maybe far. So what do you think? Is it a game or decision?
It is a decision.
Why?
Because you can change any, or you can choose any car, and at any station it could be closer to exit or much more far.
Well, I think it's a game. Why? Because people affect each other and they are aware about it. There are some preferences, and these preferences, they are pretty similar for all people. Maybe some people are exceptions, but majority of people, first of all, prefer to sit rather than stand, right? Then prefer to ride in a subway car with fewer people. So I don't like when there are a lot of people in the car, right? Like in the rush hours. And also people prefer to walk less. Of course, it depends on your age, maybe some other things, but usually, let's say I came from here, from this entrance, and there is no people in the train. So I would take this car that is close to me. But if there are lots of people, I would probably walk to take the far car. I hope that maybe there are less people there so I can sit and read. So does it make sense? Do you use metro, subway? Is it somehow familiar to you? So what do you think? Then you make your decision about which subway car to take. Do you think about these things or not?
For sure we do. Yeah.
Okay, so what is funny about this game is that it seems to be evident that we need to go to the far car because there are fewer people there. But the problem is everybody thinking the same way. So people can go to the far car. Then at the next level of thinking, maybe you should go to the near car because people who go there, they commute nearby. For example, if I have to travel just a couple of stations, I'm okay with standing, so I will take this car. But if I have to go to the final station, I would prefer to go here, right? So maybe if I take this car, I have to stand some period of time, but then I can take a seat. But if I go here, I have to stand all the way. But what about the next step? Maybe then people do the next step, right? There is a joke, probably the most famous joke about the economists, is that economists go down to the street with his friends, and his friends said to him, "Look, this is $100 bill." And the economist answered, "It's a nonsense. If it would be $100 bill, somebody would already take it." This is how economists think, because we expect people to be rational and trying to maximize their welfare. So we expect everything to be already optimized. Like usually there is more or less equal number of people in all cars, right? Exactly because people behave this way. Or it's like if you came to the supermarkets, I personally do not try to find the shortest line because I expect that people are already done this work for me. So now let's play a game. So let's play a game to better grasp these ideas. We'll play games, I think, several times during the course. Games are not graded, so it will not influence your final grades. But we ask all of you to participate and report your real name, because we plan to give small gifts to the winners. So please report your real name and please try to win in the game. So here is the link. Let me copy it to the chat. Can I do it? Here. Please open it. Can you see this form? If you click the link.
Yes.
Okay, great. So you need to report your name and last name. Please start from last name, maybe it's easier. Then all you have to choose is all you need to do is just choose an integer from 0 to 100. From 0 to 100. And the student who chooses the closest to 2/3 of the average win. Is it clear? So all of you will report some number from 0 to 100. Then I will calculate the average. And the student who have chosen something closest to 2/3 of this average wins. Very simple. Okay, please do it. Oops. So I give you a couple more seconds, maybe 10 seconds to decide, and then we'll find who's the winner. Do you need more time or we are ready? Are you done?
Yes.
Okay, I hope everybody's ready. If you're not ready, please raise your hands like this. Okay, I think we're ready. Then, so 93 students responded. We have How many people? Okay, Anna, Veronica, please choose the number. Number from 0 to 100. Okay, so 98. Okay. So here's your answers. So let's calculate average. Funny. And now let's calculate 2/3. So it's 29. So let me rank to find who was the closest to it. I forget how to do it. Okay. So, sorry guys. Okay, so 25. 25. Oh, 24. Oh, 25, sorry, 25. And Yana. So you reported 25, right?
Yes, I am.
Great. Can you explain your logic? Have you used any logic at all or just guessed?
No, I just guessed.
So you are the winner. Let me write down.
May I ask?
Yeah.
For example, the average, 2 out of 3 of the average was 29, yes. But now we see some people who choose like 29, 30, if I'm not mistaken.
I think 2/3 was 25.
No, when you copied the values only and passed it in the beginning of the list, it's actually 29.
Sorry.
It was 29, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for Yana. I'm sorry, you're not winner.
Okay.
Timofey Petrov. Not actually Polina. Polina, have you used any logic?
No, at all.
Not at all.
Suppose
Guys,
that it would be right answer.
let's say all of you do not use any logic at all. Like you just guess. So you choose the number randomly from 0 to 100. So what would be the average then? Like expectation, some probability theory here.
It would be close to
The average will be about
Around.
What? Can you repeat?
will be 50.
I still didn't get it. Can you repeat the number?
Around 50.
Right. So probably the people who reported something higher than 50, they lose for sure. Like no chances you can win. So if all people have chosen their numbers randomly, then to win, you need to choose 33. And actually, based on the average, I can see that majority of you had no idea what you should do here in this game, right? But let's play it one more time. So we do the same thing, we just play the same game one more time. Let me just write down Polina. So wait a second. So we'll play the same game one more time. Clear. Delete all responses. Okay, deleted. So now you can answer. Please, again, use the same link and again, report your first name and last name and choose the number. Are you done? Do you need some time to think or?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, some people answered in the dialogue for some reason. Don't do it. So please answer in the Google form. So please use Google form to give your answer. So please raise your hands if you still more time. If you still need more time. Anybody? So you're done, right? Okay. No, we're still waiting for some people to answer. Come on, who's left? Five more seconds. Okay, so 94. Okay, I'm not accepting responses anymore. Okay, let's take a look at the distribution. Again, some people have chosen number greater than 50. These people, they just do not pay attention at all. The most popular answer was 12. Interesting. Some people think 3. Do you remember we started the lecture with talking about expectations? Sorry?
It's not 12. Most people chosen it's 22. It's just the number of people, 12.
Oh, got it.
12% have chosen.
Yeah. 12.8% of people have chosen 12. Okay, so we started the lecture with talking about expectations, right? After we've discussed the idea, like the first time you try to understand, so what's the point of the game? The second time you have much clearer idea what happens in the game, right? And if all of you are calculators, so what would be the best guess? So what do you think? Like all of you like robots. So what would robots to answer here? 0. So basically then you choose, you need to somehow estimate how smart are other students. Do they really pay attention? How many people will choose 100, for example? Because just one student, if all of you choose 0, but 100 choose one student choose 100, it will influence average a lot, right? So let's find the winner. What happens here? Okay, I've done something horrible here. I should delete them. I thought they are deleted.
New results are below this one.
Yeah, if you take a look at the time, so you're right. Thank you. Okay, let me. Okay, some anonymous response. This person will not get his present if he'll win. So okay, sort shit. 8C. Let me just delete this part at all, and then just rank based on this and calculate. Yeah, again, we have some number of people who have answers greater than 50. Okay, average. Well, not bad. Well, still pretty close to the first game. So you don't really trust in your students, in your group mates. So don't really believe in them. So it's 18, and the winner is Polina Zinchenko. Polina, can you explain your reasoning?
So, yeah, firstly, when we used the first form, we got 29 as an answer, final answer, and I decided to multiply it by 2 divided by 3. And firstly, I got 19, but then I decided that some people obviously choose integer less than they used in the first form. And that's why I decided to take 18 and not 19.
Cool. So 2 Polinas won today. Great. So some takeaways from the game. So if people choose numbers randomly, the average will be 50. So to win, you need to choose 33, right? If all players assume other players choose numbers randomly, 22. So that's why this game is called Race to the Bottom. We can be pretty sure if you play one more time, the average will be lower. So every time we play, the average will be lower. The more prepared the audience. So you can play it with, I don't know, Nobel Prize winners, and probably number will be close to the 0. If you play it with, I don't know, school children, it will be probably close to 50. So that's why it's called Race to the Bottom. So you have to evaluate. So your choice depends on your evaluation of other players, right? So as our last winner, as Polina said, she was thinking about what other students will do, right? So maybe some students will choose I don't know, very high numbers, very low numbers. And these students, they also think about you, right? So other players, their choices depend on their evaluation of you. And even more, your choice depends on your expectations on how they evaluate you. So for example, what do I mean? Let's say you're really smart. So you know that it should be probably 0 in this game. But you think that other players think you are stupid, and that's why you'll choose something from 0 to 100 and maybe close to 100. And because you expect them to think so about you, the best decision for you will be to choose not something close to 0, but something close to 50. No, not 50, but 33. Does it make sense? So that's why game theory is so interesting, because it's almost infinite chain of reasoning. You have any questions? Any questions about the game? Okay, no questions. So let me give you some short overview of the history of game theory. It was created as a branch of applied math. So it's just, as mathematicians do, just enjoy doing some, I don't know, exercises that were like considered to be very far from real world. Then game theory was used in World War II, and I present very famous example to you today. Very famous example of the game and game theory being applied to like decision during the war. Also, game theory became popular among foreign policy folks during the Cold War, during the deterrence. Maybe you heard the term MAD, mutually assured destruction. Have you heard it? MAD, like MAD. You know what is mutually assured destruction? That's the idea that if there are two superpowers, the United States and the USSR, and both of them have a big nuclear force, it doesn't make sense to attack. It doesn't make sense to start a war, because the second country will be able to retaliate in such a scale that it would be destruction for both countries. So that's why it's mutually, so for both countries, assured, so for sure destruction. And there is idea that that's why we're still alive. So like two countries having big nuclear forces and intimidating each other into basically peace without having nuclear war. Then in 60s, game theory was imported into the social sciences, politics, international relations, and economics. And a lot of people get their Nobel Prizes a couple of decades later, or 3 decades later, for things they've done in 60s using game theory in economics. Then game theory was used in evolutionary biology in 70s. I should have a step here. And it became popular in management also in 19s. Probably 19s was the period then game theory was implemented into business education and was used in management. So why study game theory? We can think about game theory as a framework for understanding choice and situations among competing players. And this is pretty good definition of business decisions, right? game theory is applied for determining different strategies in the business world. Unfortunately, game theory is not something that you can use directly, as you can use directly, I don't know, Python skills or maybe accounting. So you cannot just apply it directly. It just gives you mathematical abstraction to reason about player strategies and responses. But you can kind of think about it as a simulator. So you can simulate various scenarios and see each of them unfold. So what will happen if I behave this way? So let's assume that my competitor is a rational player. So what is the best thing for him to respond? And then we can try to predict what will happen. So the idea of game theory is to give us tools to predict what will happen in particular situation. Another way how we can use game theory, basically game theory, there are some rules of the game, and we try to predict what will happen in the end. There is another version of game theory called mechanism design. In a mechanism design, we have some idea of what we want to get, and we want to create some rules that will allow us to get it. So every time our government creates some rules, or maybe inside of some company or corporation, you create some rules, you should not expect that people will just obey them. You should expect that people will somehow treat them, trick them, try to find the ways to exploit these rules, right? So what is the best way to make people to do something that is in your, as a company management or shareholders' interests? So here you also can use game theory. Of course, it is not sure that game theory allows you to give right prediction, but it will increase your odds of being right. Increase your odds of being right. So we've defined the game. Now we understand what is game, what is decision. Let's lay down the key elements of the game. And acronym PAP always, well, often used. So every game has players. So players, this is the vocabulary we use in game theory. In microeconomics, they're called agents, for example, or you can call them decision makers. So players are those who interacting. Then players have some actions available to them. In this introductory course, we'll talk mostly about discrete actions, like I can go left, I can go right. So I have two actions available to me. But it also can be continuous action. For example, company can decide the level of outputs. I can hear myself for some reason. Maybe some of you should switch microphone off. So my point was that action can be continuous, like company decide the level of output. It's not just two variants, it's just continuous measure. Payoffs. So what are payoffs? Payoffs is what players will get in every particular outcome. Outcome is also an important term in game theory. So we'll see the example of payoffs later. So payoff is what will I get finally? Information. Information is what players know. What do they know? And final rationality, how do they think? But again, in this introductory course, we just assume players to be rational. It simplifies a lot. So now we need to decide how to represent a game. Well, actually, if you can describe situation in these terms, players, actions, payoffs, and information, then it's already a game. It's already presented as a game. But here's the formal definition. So game can be considered as a triple of set of players, set of actions of all players, and rules for evaluating of payoffs for each players. So there are some rules how actions translate to payoffs, lead to payoffs. Do you have questions about these elements? Is everything clear? Okay, let me pay attention to one thing here. As a synonym of actions, sometimes use the term strategy. For simultaneous game, we'll discuss later what is simultaneous game. For simultaneous game, they are synonyms, but for dynamic games, they are not. So in the beginning of the course, we can use terms actions and strategies as a synonyms. Okay, so I promised you famous example. So here is the famous example. It's called Game Battle of the Bismarck Sea. It's a real situation, something that happened during World War II in the Pacific. The United States and Australia aircrafts attacked a Japanese convoy carrying troops to New Guinea. You know where's New Guinea? To the north of Australia. And most of the Japanese task force was destroyed and Japanese troops' losses were heavy. So here's the map. Of course, it's incredibly complicated story and there are books about it and you can read Wikipedia if you want to get some context and some ideas, but we'll simplify it a lot. So we present it as a very simple game. And in this game, the Japanese have to decide which route to choose. So they bring reinforcement to New Guinea. They can choose northern route or southern route. So two variants, two possible actions, northern and southern. And then the US have to decide where to send planes to look for Japanese fleet. So they can send them to the southern route or to the northern route. There is a paper, famous paper, presented it as a game theory. It's this paper. I will upload the slides to Teams, so if you want to read some details, you can read there. So here is something being called matrix of the game or table of the game. It's a very popular, we'll use it a lot during the course. It's a convenient way to present the game if we have two players. It's also possible to use with 3 players, but it's a bit complicated. With more than 3, it's a very complicated. So look, we have 2 players. Kini is the US general or admiral, and Imamura is Japanese general, I think. There are 2 actions available for both of them. So it's north and south and north and south. It's a very popular notation because it's very convenient. Usually, please remember that here we have names for players, but if you have just player 1 and player 2, by convention, player 1 should be here, and he's sometimes called horizontal player, and player 2 should be here, and he's sometimes called vertical player. So horizontal sorry, horizontal and vertical player. So definition of the game, we have players, we have two players. We have strategies or actions available to them. Yeah, we have them. Now we need to describe how these particular strategies translate to some payoffs. So we have 4 profiles. Profiles are combinations of actions of 2 players. So there are 4 possible outcomes, 4 cells. Every cell is outcome. Profile is a combination of strategies that brought us to this outcome. So to be in this cell, Imamura will have to choose north and Kini will have to choose north. Is it clear?
Yes.
Great. I think many of you studied some game theory in microeconomics or even in the school. Maybe you heard about prisoner's dilemma, but the beginning of the course is a bit slow on purpose for you to not to be too intimidating immediately. So here we have payoffs. Payoffs here are numbers of days with successful air attack. So the US would have to bomb Japanese fleets as many days as possible. So, for example, south route is longer than north one. That's why if Japanese will choose southern route and Kini will send planes to look for Japanese to the south, the US planes will find the fleets and will bomb them for 3 days. So 3 days of bombing. If Imamura will send his fleet to the north route, then it's a shorter route. And even if Kini will send his fleet to the north also, it will be 2 days of bombing, 2 days of bombing, because it's a shorter route. If Imamura will send his fleet to the short So Imamura decided to send his fleet to the south routes, and Kini sent his planes to look for north. So it's 2 days of bombing. Is it clear? Look, here I use different colors. Then you'll do it in your notebook, for example. It's not convenient, of course, to use different colors. And convention is the first number is for the first player, horizontal player, and the second number in the cell is for vertical player, for the second player. So these are their payoffs, what they got. This kind of game is called zero-sum game. Zero-sum game. Zero-sum game is the situation then benefit of one player is a loss of another player. So what is good for the US is a bad for Japan, right? So free, it's a really good for the US, but it's really bad for Imamura here. So it's called negative. It's called zero-sum game. If you sum up these numbers, 2 plus minus 2, it's 0. 2 plus minus 2, it's 0. 1 plus minus 1, 0. 3 plus minus 3, it's 0. In this kind of game, you're trying to harm your opponent as much as possible, right? It's not always like this in game theory. So in a zero-sum game, we can use this notation. We can write down only one number. To simplify, we can write down only one number. So these are payoffs for the first player, and these are payoffs for the second player. So the standard notation is to use payoff of the first player. So present the game as this first table. So we can do it if it's a zero-sum game. If it's a zero-sum game, so only payoff for the first player. And because we know that it's a zero-sum game, I can find out Imamura's payoff immediately. So it's -2 here, -2 here, -1 here, and -3 here. Okay, so it's just story how we can present the game, how we can take real life situation and present it as the game. Talking about solution, it's for the next lecture. So I plan to discuss it in the next lecture. So what will happen and what we can predict using game theory. So types of the games. The second part of the lecture, let's talk about classification of games and different games. The first distinction we can use is distinction between cooperative game theory and non-cooperative. Cooperative models assume that agents have cooperative mechanism. So cooperative means they can make some commitments, some agreements, and they have to follow these agreements outside of specified rules of the game. And cooperative game theory focus on how to allocate the benefits resulting from cooperation. It will be at the second part of the course. So in this module, you can forget about cooperative models. In the third module, we'll work on non-cooperative models. So non-cooperative models assume that players do not have cooperative mechanism. So these models focus on how to behave strategically. So how to achieve the best for every player. Important catch here is that individual actions can be compatible with achievement of mutual gain. So in non-cooperative models, it's also possible for players to obtain the best outcome for both of them, mutually beneficial outcome, but it depends on the structure of the game. In some games, it's impossible. In some games, it's possible. So the important distinction here is that in non-cooperative games, cooperation emerges only if it is in the participants' separate and individual interests. So we assume that in non-cooperative game theory, every player concerns only about his or her payoff. Concerned only about his or her payoff, and does not concerns about payoff of another player. Okay, two types of the game we kind of discussed today already, constant sum game and non-constant sum game. So constant sum game, it's a situation in which the total payoffs are fixed and never change. And they can be equal 0, and 0 is the most famous example of constant sum game. But there are also possible some other situations then it's not equal 0. So zero-sum game is a special kind of constant sum game. So every zero-sum game is a constant sum game, but not every constant sum game is a zero-sum game. And finally, non-constant sum games are those in which the sum of all payoffs changes depending on the choices of the players. So choices of the players are important. So here's the example of a constant sum game. We have two players. Player 1 is a horizontal player, player 2 is a vertical player. These two players, they have two strategies available to them. The first strategy is to support, the second is to oppose. Support and oppose. And if you sum up payoffs for players in every cell, in every outcome, they equal to 100. So if player 1 supports and player 2 supports, it's 100. So it's 60 for player 1 and 40 for player 2. If player 1 supports some decision and player 2 opposes, then it's 20 for player 1 and 80 for player 2. We sum up, it's 100. So this is the example of a constant sum game, which is not a zero-sum game. For non-constant sum games, probably the most famous example is the War and Peace. Right? So we assume that if both countries decide to have a war, so it's bad for both of them. So it's minus 100 for one country and minus 100 for another. If both countries decide to have peace, so it's good for both of them. So it's 100 for the first country and 100 for the second country. But if one of the countries decides to attack another one, and another one country is unprepared, so here country 2 decides to attack, so it chooses war, but country 1 chooses war, but country 2 chooses peace. It's 150 for country 1 and 80 for country 2. So if you sum up payoffs in every cell, you can see that they do not equal to any particular value. So they are different in cells. Is it clear? Do you need any, some more explanation? Is it clear about constant sum game and non-constant sum game? Basically, technically, I think it's very easy and very clear that you can just sum up the payoffs and see what happens. At a substantial level, these kind of games, they have some cooperation in it. It's possible for players to cooperate. For example, in this game, both countries can choose peace and peace, and this is an example of cooperation, and it's definitely better for both of them if they have 100. By the way, if you heard about Prisoner's Dilemma, you can see that this is basically Prisoner's Dilemma. But in this kind of game, in constant sum game, everything that one player can get, he or she gets at the expense of another player. So it's a pure conflict. If in this game both conflict and cooperation are possible, in this game it's a pure conflict. So you don't really want to help another player because you want to harm him as much as possible, because if you can get something from him, he loses something, you get something. I think it's clear. Maybe you heard in management literature or business literature, it's very popular to talk that competition is not always a zero-sum game, right? So sometimes then you have a price war, it's a negative sum game, so both players lose. If you somehow have some agreements and work to develop markets, to lobby the government to increase the conditions for the industry in general, it's a positive sum game. So all these ideas, they came from game theory. So no questions about constant sum game and non-constant sum game. It's clear, right? Are you still here? Please tell me something.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. So another classification of the game. Sorry? Okay, another classification of the games is based on the modes of playing. There are simultaneous games and sequential games. Simultaneous are also called static, and sequential are also called dynamic. Let's discuss it and then go back to once and repeat it. So here's the example of a simultaneous or static game. How's it called? Do you know this game? Do you know this game?
Yes.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors, right? So the very idea of this game is that you show rock, paper, or scissors simultaneously, right? So if we play it step by step, like chess, for example, so let's say, let's play with me. Rock, paper, scissors as a dynamic game. So I'm going doing the first step. So I show scissors. So what is your replay? Of course, all of you will show rock, right? So it doesn't make sense to play in this fashion step by step, because first player always lose and the second player always wins. So this is the example of simultaneous game. So we make our decisions simultaneously and obtain some results. The example of dynamic or sequential game, I've mentioned chess. Chess, or good example of dynamic game. But here's the simpler game. Do you know the English name for it? Do you know English name for this game? Tic-tac-toe, I think it's called. Children like to play this game. Adults not so much, because it's very easy to, if you know how to play, you always play draw. It's so boring. But if you forget how to do it, you can play it with computer. So the idea here is that the first player chooses his cell, for example, in the center. The second player who plays with O's choose, I don't know, let's say this corner. So it's played step by step. So this is called sequential game or dynamic game. So what do you think about this situation? This is a penalty kick. Is it a simultaneous game or a sequential game? Is it a game at all? Why is it a game? So what do you think?
It
is a game.
Sequential.
So I'm not talking about football in general. I'm talking about this particular situation of penalty kick. If it's a game, who are the players?
It's the one who shoots penalty and the goalkeeper.
So kicker and goalie, right? Goalkeeper. Right. And what are their what are actions available to them?
Kick the ball and the catching.
It's like no. For example, for kicker, he cannot catch it, right? So what are actions available to kicker?
He can shoot in right corner, in left corner, in top corner. He can shoot it with power or technically, accurately.
Right, but let's simplify it and let's say there are only two actions, left corner and right corner. So two. What about goalkeeper? What are actions available to the goalkeeper?
Like jumping, catching, the main action.
Catching, to catch is an outcome. This is what will happen in the end, to catch or not to catch. Action is where to jump, right?
To move to the right, to the left corner.
Yeah, dive
or to stand.
left. Right, so we have pretty much described as a game. So we have two players, we have actions available to them, and we can predict payoffs. For example, we can simplify, we can say if the kicker shoots to the left and goalkeeper jump to the right, then it's a score, it's a goal. But if kicker shoot to the left and keeper jumps to the left, then kicker failed to score, right? So it's a rule how actions transform to payoffs. Okay, great. So now we have a game. We simplify the real life situation to the game. What about initial question? Is it simultaneous or sequential game?
Simultaneous.
Why?
Because they move and kick in the same time. If somebody will kick and after it goalkeeper will move, it automatically will make this game lost for the goalkeeper. And no?
Look, this game, for some people, it looks to be sequential, right? Because there is some order of actions. So first, a striker lines up with the ball in front of him, keeper probably. Then he runs forward and kicks the ball toward the net. And then the goalie tries to stop it. So there are two actions. Shoots and jump. But the speed of the reaction of the goalkeeper is not enough to play it as a sequential game. If it would be, I don't know, some robots, maybe a robot can see where ball is going and then jump there, and it would be sequential game. And it would be like with rock, paper, scissors, robot will always win because it's like second mover advantage in this game. But with people, they have to make their decision simultaneously, and the goalkeeper has to decide where to jump before the strike. So in real life, they have to play simultaneously. And I like this example to show you that this classification of games, it's a classification of models. We can present the same situation in different ways, and some ways are better than another. So if you want to predict the strategies of the players, it's much better to think about it as a simultaneous game. So there are academic papers about it, actually. And here are real life payoffs. So in real life, if kicker choose left and goalkeeper choose left, there are still pretty large chance to score. This is percentage. It's a zero-sum game again, right? That's why we have payoffs only for the kicker. So it's percent chance of scoring. So for goalie, the higher is the worst. For kicker, the higher is the best. So ideally, kicker would like to shoot in preferred corner. If he's a right-legged, then left corner is the preferred one, right? And if goalie jump to the right, then it's almost 100% chance to score. So my point is, again, it depends on how we present real-life situation as the game. There are many ways, but some are better than others. Maybe in microeconomics course, you studied Cournot model and Stackelberg model. So Cournot model is the model with their firms, oligopolies make their decisions simultaneously. So firms, competing firms, make their decision about output simultaneously. And in a Stackelberg model, there is a leader and follower, and it's a dynamic game. So which one is better? It depends on the situation. So we can two different models for real life. So talking about repeated game, So here, game can be played just one time, or it can be played repeatedly. You can think about real life as the many repeated games. So let's say your friends ask you to help. No, well, not your friend, but let's say other student, your group mates ask you to help with something. And you can agree or to help or say, no, I'm sorry. You would prefer to say no because you don't want to spend your time. But if it's a repeated game, then maybe next time you have to ask for help. So there are another incentives in repeated game. And I think it's easy to understand, right? If it's played one time, it's a one-time played game. If it's played several times, it's a repeated game. About incentives to behave in a good way in repeated game, you can play this game called Evolution of Trust. So you can Google it for it, or you can take slides in Teams and just click. It's pretty entertaining, so maybe you'll enjoy it. Finally, to the most complicated part. Games can be classified as games with perfect information and imperfect information, and games with complete and incomplete information. So it's another classification of the games. Perfect means with knowledge of other players' choices. And you can think about dynamic games. So games played step by step, such as chess. So we do our decisions. You can see my decisions. For example, I've decided to go from e4 to where to go in chess. So you can see it. It's a perfect information available to all players. So you can see what happened at the previous stage. Example of imperfect information game is any simultaneous game, for example, rock, paper, scissors. So you don't know what I'm going to do, right? When we make our decisions, you don't know what I'm going to choose. I don't know what are you going to choose. So all simultaneous games are imperfect information games, but not all dynamic games are perfect, because it's possible, well, you'll see it later in the course, that there are dynamic games with imperfect information. Complete information and incomplete information. This is probably the most interesting part of game theory, but we will not have it in our course because it's pretty advanced. So the idea of complete information is that knowledge of players is available to all players to, again, I need to edit my slides, available to all players. So even, for example, in rock, paper, scissors, you don't know what I'm going to show, I don't know what you're going to show. So it's symmetric. In incomplete information game, it's asymmetric, and a good example is all card games. So the very idea of card games, for example, poker, is to keep your information private. You have some information, other people don't know it, and you want to use it in the most efficient way for you, right? So that's the idea of a card games. It's incomplete information game. So it's all with the classification. And the final thing for this course, I want to show you, well, to discuss with you again how we can apply game theory. So we start from real world problem. So there is real world, and real world is incredibly complicated. Any real world problem has a lot of context and details, right? Tons and tons of details. Then we need to simplify this real world problem and present it as a model. Today we'll learn how to do it. To present it as a game, we need to find players, we need to find actions available for them, and we need to describe rule how these actions bring players some results. So model is a simplified version of reality with only important aspects, right? For example, we've simplified a lot. We simplify that, for example, kicker can shoot to the left and to the right, although it's much more complicated, right? You mentioned that he can, I don't know, strength of the kick can vary, many things can vary. Then if we have a model, then we can use math and logic to make some predictions. And this course is basically about this, how we can start from some model and find prediction using math. So we can predict what will happen if the model, if players are rational, so they care about the payoffs and they try to achieve the best. It just follows from the model logically and mathematically. Then you need somehow to take these ideas from the model and apply them to real life, to find real life insights. And again, it's not so simple. So these green arrows, I call it translation. So you need to translate real world problem into game theory language, right? And then game theory prediction, you need somehow to translate it into real life insights. Again, it's not so simple. In this course, you have a special assignment for you to practice these green arrows. It will be group projects at the end of the course. But most of the course is based on this orange part. So we'll model the situation and we'll find predictions based on game theory. And of course, all models are wrong, but some are useful. So the models we use, they are wrong in terms they are very simplified. So it's a simplified version of reality. But if they can give us good insights, then they are useful. So thank you for your attention. Do you have any questions? I'm 2 minutes left, so you can just leave. Thank you for the class and good evening. Have a good evening. But if some of you have questions, you can ask.
Where we can find materials of the lecture?
I will upload it to the folder in. Can you see my screen, by the way?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I show you where I will upload it. So general channel files.
Yeah, in Teams, okay.
Yeah, and lecture slides. I will just correct some mistakes that I found during the lecture. So it will
thank you.
take a couple of hours. Any other questions?
What is the formula of this course?
Uh,
Grading, I mean, our marks.
We decided to discuss it during the seminars. So during the first seminar, we'll present you the grading system.
Okay, thank you.
And also during the seminars, is it more convenient to use written notes, or we can use our, I don't know, pads or online sources?
I didn't get it. Can you explain your question?
Well, during the seminars, we will have some games or practice, yes?
Yeah.
And for us, it will be more convenient to use some written notes. Or it is possible to use Word, for instance.
So your question is, should you write down using some paper notes?
Yeah,
or...
what is more convenient?
Well, it depends on you. So it's for you to decide. It's for you to decide. Any other questions?
Are we going to have the seminar this Friday? Because I don't have it in my schedule.
It's the same for me. So I look at rules and I don't have them seminar there. So seems like no.
Oh, okay.
I think no. Any other questions? Okay, so if no more questions, thank you for the class. See you next time. Have a good evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you for
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.